So I'm supposed to be talking about assuring and measuring the impact of volunteers. What I'd like to say at the beginning, as I always do, because when I'm physically there, at least I'm with you. Now I'm thousands of miles away on the other side of the globe. So I want to assure you that I know that you're the experts about Singapore. You know what works in your culture. You know the things, and I want you to hold me to that. If I say something that makes no sense to you for Singapore, please let me know. And also, you know your organization. That's your role, to be thinking about it that way. What I'm here to do this morning in opening your program is to represent the field of volunteer management. By that I mean that I represent a worldwide group of people who have devoted themselves to teaching others and helping others to be effective in involving volunteers. So that's what my job is. So I'm going to begin with the main part of the program. The truth is that even though what you've asked me to talk about is measuring and assessing, it all begins with what unfortunately is too often a lack of strategic thinking about volunteer involvement. It's been my experience everywhere I go. This is not just a Singaporean observation. Everywhere I go, and certainly also in the United States, too many organizations are actually unclear about why they're involving volunteers in the first place. It sounds self-evident. Well, we have volunteers, but it isn't self-evident at all. There are a lot of assumptions, but very few conversations. If you get nothing else from today but the determination to go home and start a conversation about what is it we really want from volunteers, that is critically important. In fact, the first question should be, why do we want volunteers at all? Now, I bet you're thinking, well, what's wrong with you, Susan? We don't have enough money. We have to have volunteers, right? Too often we're involving volunteers because of what we don't have, not because of what we do want. And it's a false assumption that volunteers are the answer to bad budgets or not enough money. But really knowing why we want them, and then what is it we want them to accomplish is a critical question. Having volunteers isn't the same as making sure volunteers are doing important things. What types of volunteers will be successful? And who's going to support volunteers in their work? While I can't imagine any of you think these are silly questions, I'd like you to think to yourself, have we really and truly answered them in our organization? Because everything about impact, everything about effective accomplishment of goals starts with what you want to do in the first place when you recruit volunteers. So the clearer we are in articulating the answers to these kinds of questions, the greater the benefit to our organization of volunteer engagement, because we'll have a purpose. I've already said having volunteers isn't a goal. It's a way of accomplishing goals. And what's really important for me to say, because I think that often this is a question, you can be proactive in creating the most meaningful type of volunteer involvement, and we'll get back to that. What we're talking about here is an intentional system. Volunteers don't simply materialize, like poof, there they are one day. They somehow miraculously appear. They need to be recruited. They need to be onboarded, supported, and appreciated, and I think you understand that. What I want to spend a moment on, though, because I think it is helpful to understand strategy, is to point out that, of course, there's a lot about working with volunteers that looks on the surface like it's similar to human resources or personnel when you're hiring paid people. But there are quite a number of important differences, and I'd like to take a moment to talk about those because, again, I think this has to do with impact. When you have paid staff, you hire them into available jobs. The job exists and you hire them into it. But volunteers, it's a lot, not quite as clear as that. Sometimes, very often, you create what needs you have and you recruit volunteers to do them. But also, people can help you in many different ways. It's not just in doing a job. Today, one of the big things volunteers might do is work on Facebook and Twitter in spreading your message through social media. It's an activity that they do. It may not just be a job. So there's a difference right there. Then, paid staff tend to be quite similar to one another. By that I mean that your employees are probably all older than the age of 18, and they're probably younger than the age of 65 or so. They also have a certain amount of college education, or they're skilled in some way for what the work needs to be done. So they're somewhat like each other. That's not true with volunteers. Volunteers can be anybody and anything. They can be a baby that comes with a parent to visit in a nursing home. They can be retired people. They can be people who come in groups or come individually. It's far more diverse than what we have with paid staff. Paid staff work a set schedule. In fact, one of the reasons we pay people is to be able to say, these are your hours, please be here. Now, while volunteers certainly should be held to what they committed to, you're always negotiating their time, and they will be carving out short bursts of time to give you. So again, if you have someone who works all week long and you haven't thought through what you want them to do exactly, at some point in the week they'll figure it out. But if a volunteer comes to you for 2 hours on a Monday and you don't have anything prepared for them to do, you've wasted their whole week. And that's somewhat what makes the pressure to be effective with volunteers greater. And finally, for paid staff, for economic necessity, their job is a priority. It's how they put a roof over their heads. It's how they feed their family. And they will do a great deal for that. Volunteers, however, for them, the volunteer role is an avocation. Now understand, I am not suggesting it doesn't matter to them. In fact, they're often quite passionate about what they do as volunteers. But they have other things in their life that take more of their time, family care, their own paid jobs. And so when they come to us, they want to do the best, but they need our help to focus because it isn't the priority, the thing they spend the most hours on in their life. Anyone have any questions about that or want to add something to that? Okay. So the other thing that's different about paid staff and volunteers, and I think, again, to me, this is so important in understanding the impact that you want from volunteer engagement, and that is to understand that volunteers are part of what I call a continuum of supporters. The continuum of supporters means if all you do is think of volunteers as unpaid staff, you've just limited yourself to looking at them as free laborers. They're not free anyway, but you think of them as filling job slots. That's just too limiting, and I'll explain that in a moment. What they are, every organization, especially not-for-profit or non-governmental organizations, need friends. They need people in the community who are supporting their work. And on this continuum of supporters, people can move in and out of various roles. Now, this is not a great illustration. I just threw it together for the slide. But what I was trying to demonstrate here is that there is a continuum that goes in on itself. People can support you in many ways. They can give you money or things. They can give you time, and it's kind of nice sometimes to think about volunteers as time donors. It makes them different. Actually, I'll tell you a word that I love that's a newer word. I don't know if you've heard it. Have you heard the term skillanthropist? There are philanthropists and there are skillanthropists. Someone who gives of themselves through their skills. I love that as a term. Then there are people who advocate for us. And on the other side of that circle, you'll see a voter and a taxpayer. We all need people who will elect people to office, who will do what they need to do legislatively to make our causes more successful. We need people who are willing to pay money in their taxes for some of what we need. And also on this list, for some of you, you may have people who are members that actually join. You may be a museum where someone joins to be a member, but it's not quite the same as being a volunteer or a donor. They get benefits. Maybe they're a resident in this facility for older people. So these are many identities, and you can see, and the reason there are lines through the circle is people can be both a money donor and an advocate. They can be a member and a participant and also be a volunteer. But the goal, one of the big goals of volunteer engagement, is to make friends for a long time. Paid staff members will come and go, but ideally volunteers, even if they're not active at that moment, will remain part of the people who help you in a wide variety of ways. So it's a slightly different way of thinking about it, and I encourage you not to get caught up in the volunteer as a unpaid staff member model, because it's limiting. Now, this image that I've just talked to you does not just happen. And I'd like you to see volunteer management as friend raising, and that we should treat volunteers the way fundraisers cultivate money donors. By that I mean, if I give your organization a donation of money, let's say something really small, you may wish I give you more, but I promise you that whoever's in charge of fundraising in your organization is going to cash that check. They're going to start a record on me, I promise you, and they're going to keep asking me for more things. That's what cultivation of donors is all about. And yet, when we have volunteers, we say, oh, well, it's so much work to involve them for one day. We need the cultivation mindset because volunteers move in and out of roles, as I said. You've got to plan, and that's what this idea of a volunteer management system is, which I'm about to talk to you about. You've got to plan as an organization to incorporate volunteers into your work and mission and support them to be successful. And along with that, and this is the key element, is to train paid staff in how to team with volunteers. The sad fact is that very few people are taught how to be effective in working with volunteers in their professional education. They can become a social worker and never learn about it. They can become a teacher and never learn about it. They can become a member of the clergy and never learn about working with volunteers, and yet they're going to do it.